Earning a trip to the Pro Bowl is one of the highest honors that an NFL player can receive. Admittedly, it is a far cry from taking home league MVP honors, or even being designated as first or second team All-Pro for your position. But even so, the Pro Bowl, professional football's all-star game, has a certain prestige to it even if no NFL fans actually even bother to watch it. I think it has something to do with the name. Pro Bowl. It just sounds awesome. Plus, in most normal years, you could earn a pretty sweet vacation to a warm weather destination like Hawaii, where it was played for decades, or even more recently, Orlando. And for many players, there is a language built into their contracts that entitled them to some form of a financial bonus for being selected to the game. So needless to say, it is something that players are striving to accomplish, whether they admit it or not. But there is one player who found himself thrust into the news cycle because of the peculiar reason that his Pro Bowl prospects have inexplicably skyrocketed heading down the stretch run of the 2020 NFL season. The Baltimore Ravens defensive end, Yannick Ngakoue. Now, that peculiar reason, in short, is that another team's fan base, looking at you Jaguars fans, has made it their mission to get Yannick selected to this year's Pro Bowl. I know that this may seem a little bit strange at first glance. Yannick is a nice player, there is no doubt about that, but it is not like he is some all-world talent. But it is worth mentioning, there is some precedent for this in other pro sports. We have seen this very phenomenon take place in the NBA with obscure players like Tacko Fall. Fall, the Boston Celtics 7'5" center, who plays like 2 minutes a game if he's lucky, ended up leading the league in all-star votes for a time, because he has found himself with a sort of a cult following amongst fans. But I can assure you that this is not the case with Ngakoue, as his popularity amongst fans pales in comparison to the likes of a Tacko Fall type. The fact of the matter is that the Jaguars faithful have a much more nefarious, and honestly, intelligent reason for voting for their estranged defensive end. The story starts in Jacksonville, where Ngakoue played the first 4 seasons of his NFL career, after the Jags took him in the 3rd round of the 2016 draft out of the University of Maryland. Ngakoue was an immediate contributor for Jacksonville, playing in all 16 games as a rookie, forcing 4 fumbles and netting 8 sacks, impressive totals for a mid-round draft pick. And what's better, he seemed like he was developing into a premier edge rusher in the NFL. His sophomore campaign was actually his best season in his career to date. During that 2017 season, he started every single game and was selected to a Pro Bowl for the first time. It's hard to argue that he didn't deserve it this time around either, as he was a force to be reckoned with all year, forcing 6 fumbles, recovering 2, and snagging 12 sacks. Now, for those of you who can remember all the way back to 2017, this was actually an exciting time in Jacksonville. They had an up-and-coming quarterback in Blake Bortles, who was showing signs that he might actually be a competent NFL quarterback. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. And this was the one and only season of the Sacksonville Jaguars, the name for their elite defensive unit that led the team to the AFC Championship game in 2017 and was supposed to dominate the league for years to come, only to end up blowing it up entirely over the course of the next 2 years, trading away damn near every key contributor from that 2017 season for pennies on the dollar. While many of the other trades, Jaguars general manager David Caldwell came fairly early on in the team's downward spiral, and Ngakoue, much to his disappointment, was held on to for 2 full seasons after 2017. And let's just say that it was a pretty tense 2 years that included several shots being taken back and forth, including a Twitter feud with owner Shad Khan's son Tony in April of the 2020 season. Yannick then went on ESPN's NFL Live as a special guest and doubled down on his trade demands, saying the Jaguars had an opportunity to extend him to a long-term contract during the last offseason, but their talks petered out and now it's time to move on. Everything comes to an end, and it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my career, Ngakoue said. I am forever thankful for what Jacksonville has brought to me and my family, but it's time to move on. Although it's unclear exactly which instance proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back regarding Ngakoue's time in Jacksonville, one thing was certain to the Jacksonville Brass: their homegrown Pro Bowl defensive end needed to be shipped out of town. And it needed to happen sooner rather than later, as his public outcry prompted a lot of backlash to an organization that was already facing a fair amount of scrutiny for its failings both on the field and in the front office. Ahead of the 2020 season, Yannick got his wish, and the suits in Jacksonville let out a sigh of relief when Ngakoue was finally dealt to the Minnesota Vikings for a second-round draft pick and a conditional fifth-round pick. Minnesota was coming off of back-to-back playoff runs and felt like they were on the brink of making a true Super Bowl run, meaning a second and a fifth was not a massive haul to give up for a former Pro Bowler, especially when you are trying to get over the hump. And Jacksonville got to stack some draft capital while ridding itself of a malcontent. Overall, it was a pretty decent deal for both sides, if you ask me. And it got off to a great start, too. Well, sort of. Up in Minnesota, Ngakoue played well, forcing 2 fumbles and recording 7 quarterback hits, as well as 5 sacks and 12 tackles for a loss in just 6 games. The only problem? Minnesota sputtered out of the gate. Actually, sputtered is putting it lightly. The Vikings were awful early on, losing 5 of its first 6 games and looking up at a solid NFC North with very little room for upward mobility. And then, in the blink of an eye, Yannick Ngakoue's career as a Minnesota Viking was over, as the team shipped him out to the East Coast to join the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens went just 1-2 following the deal, and the defense as a whole has looked rather vulnerable. Yet, seemingly out of nowhere, just as the defensive end's former team was playing its best football without him, and he and his new team were struggling mightily, there was a huge movement for Ngakoue to make the Pro Bowl that started to sweep through the internet streets. What gives? As it turns out, some contract sleuths looked into it, and the 5th-round pick that Minnesota dealt to Jacksonville in exchange for Ngakoue's services stands to become a 4th-round selection if Ngakoue is selected to the Pro Bowl this season. There are actually further provisions on the pick, too. It would turn into a 3rd-round pick if he made it to the Pro Bowl and the Vikings go on to win the Super Bowl. But even with the resurgence that they had after trading the defensive end, a run at the Lombardi Trophy doesn't seem all that likely for many. But nevertheless, it is quite a movement that has gotten started down in Jacksonville. Like I mentioned earlier, Ngakoue has not exactly helped his Pro Bowl resume since making the switch to Baltimore's black and purple. And the fan vote only counts for 1/3 of the selection criteria, as the coaches and players both have their own vote, which counts as a third each. So it still remains to be seen whether or not the Jaguars fans' efforts will end up being successful. It will be interesting to see if there are any long-term ramifications from this movement. I suppose there's a sort of checks and balances system in place already, since the players, coaches, and fans split the vote. But you could certainly see how something like this could catch the attention of other fan bases who might end up in a similar situation one day. Or maybe even a coach who has friends in other organizations that might enlist their services to vote for a certain former player's Pro Bowl ticket. It's unlikely, but if a coordinated attack like this was spawned by random people about a relatively random player, who's to say what could happen in the future in a higher stakes situation? Do you think Jaguars fans will be able to get Yannick Ngakoue to the Pro Bowl? Join us in the comment section down below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps us out a ton and we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.